Hello, I'm Aysa Tabrizi, and today our special guest is Yina Moe-Lange, the curator and author of The Big Why, a newsletter exploring the ins and outs of the future of AI and its role in society. Yina is based in San Francisco and was formerly on the investment team at Founders, a Nordic-focused early-stage venture fund investing in the future of tech. Yina is also a former Olympian, having competed in 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. Yina, in your recently started newsletter, you talk about how AI is applied in today's world. Can you tell us about your newsletter and what got you started in writing this? And what has the response been to this newsletter?
Yeah, so I started my newsletter, The Big Why, a couple of months ago. And each week I try to highlight something that I find interesting that's going on in the AI ecosystem. So it hits a wide range of topics, everything from ethical AI to technical applications. I wanted to have a super broad appeal that goes outside of just appealing to those who work directly with AI and have it be more of an approachable subject to a wider audience. So one of my goals is to keep my newsletter each week under 10 sentences. I want to make sure that it doesn't end up being this long-winded narrative. So people just, they don't have time to sit and read a novel each week these days. So the reason I started this was because I was spending a lot of time digging into AI, looking at startups and reviewing their plans. And I found that I could be helpful to the community by providing my perspective on what I think is important in AI. And so now, as I mentioned, I've been writing this newsletter for a couple of months and the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I keep getting new subscribers and they're really coming from all over the world, which I think is quite cool. My goal is to really start some discussions and engage people who are interested in AI, even if they aren't in the normal AI circles.
Can you tell us the most interesting thing you have come across writing this newsletter?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that I've come across is that there continues to be a theme that pops up when I'm touching upon many of the topics I've covered, and that is that it's really hard to tell what good AI is. In research, are the benchmarks and goals that AI and machine learning applications are going towards really the right ones? We see a lot of focus on hitting new accuracies, but sometimes the benchmarks that we see in research don't really line up with applicability in the real world. And I think what's important here is that sometimes by focusing really only on the benchmarks, it allows us kind of to skip over some of the discussions that come with ensuring privacy, that there's no bias, and also any potential climate impacts from using a lot of computing power and data storage. But I think this conversation is starting to pop up in the world, and I think that this mindset is actually changing, so that I also think is quite positive.
Yeah. So you have worked with the startups and venture capitals. Have you noticed the decline or increase in venture capital's investment in AI within the last 5 months?
I'd say generally, I haven't seen any decline in funding in AI, especially in the past couple of months. VC has ended up being quite active during COVID-19, which is different than many probably thought it would be at the beginning. At the beginning, there was a lot of focus on these internal rounds with existing portfolio companies at the start of the crisis, but really there are a lot of new funding activities going on still. With regards to overall VC funding, in the past couple of years, we've actually seen the total number of VC dollars decline. So I think in 2018, the total was $140 billion invested in VC funding. And then it actually went down to 2019, it was around 136. But during that time, AI investments actually did the opposite. So it went from around 16 billion up to over 18 billion. And we actually saw in the past couple of months that during Corona, seed stage investments in AI companies actually was higher than it was in 2019 during the same period. So it's very positive numbers when we're looking at AI funding.
But data science and AI jobs appear to be declining. Do you think it's short term or long term?
Just like many other professions, there's been a lot of turmoil in the job market. We've seen a lot of layoffs and not very many hires since the beginning of March. I think it's really hard to say what will happen to the job market in the short term. we keep seeing these waves of COVID, and different countries are dealing with it differently. So I think it's really hard to kind of say what's going to happen in the short term. But I do see this period as a time where a lot of companies are kind of streamlining their processes and cutting down teams, and making sure they're not spending extra money, which means that some of the maybe more far-fetched AI and data science teams are getting cut because they aren't seeing any return on value very short term. And so I think it's kind of hard to say what will happen short term. But I think one change that we'll see as a result of Corona, which has kind of increased this change, is that we'll see less data science specific jobs and more AI specialized jobs. I think in a workflow, you could kind of argue right now, you know, there's the AI machine learning engineers who are building this, the tools and the software that are very specifically designed to optimize and increase efficiency. And then we have data scientists who kind of help crunch numbers and do the data science work. And then that kind of goes into the business analyst, the more softer side, where, you know, maybe some business decisions are made using the data and the decisions that are made. But I think that some of the tools that machine learning engineers are developing these days and are starting to implement are actually possibly going to kind of replace some of the more traditional data science jobs. And we'll end up in this situation where we kind of have the engineers working on their tools in automation, and then the business analysts can work directly with those tools to translate the results over to the business side, kind of skipping that middle step of an analyst from the data science side.
Let's talk about your AI for Good projects. We hear you like promoting projects around AI for Good. What's an AI for Good project that made an impact on you?
So this one is, there's a lot of really good things going on out there, obviously. But there's one that I came across recently that I find is very interesting. So basically in Yemen, there are these cluster munitions that are being used in war crimes. And cluster munitions are basically just these bombs that spray extra bombs. So really, really bad weapons. And war crime prosecutors are running through the openly available visual data to try and spot these illegal cluster munitions. So first, they are using computer vision to scan more quickly and accurately than a human can. But the problem is that since the munitions are illegal, it is hard to find enough visual sources of them to use the munition spotting algorithm effectively. Thus, here they're using synthetic data to create a library of visuals that of the munitions to help them in their tasks. So I think that's really cool. And this kind of goes along further, where I think there's a lot of cool AI for Good projects where that really shows that AI can be transformative and can be applied to a variety of things. We can use computer vision as a kind of an eye in the sky for good and help situations such as, you know, oil spills or deforestation. I think it becomes really easy for us to focus on the examples where tech such as AI is applied in a harmful way. But I think there's quite a few examples where AI really goes in the complete opposite direction. And I think that overall AI can do just as much good as one might think they do harm.
Okay, as a resident of Silicon Valley and at the heart of the tech world, who do you see the next big players in the AI space?
Yeah, great question. I think everyone is wondering this, especially with everyone. A lot of these tech companies have gone fully remote recently. So I think there's kind of two parts to the question or to this answer. One, I think that Silicon Valley won't necessarily be the seat of the next big AI organizations, as startups and enterprises both are becoming more remote, and strong AI programs are popping up around the world. And there's really just great engineers that exist everywhere. You no longer need to come to Silicon Valley just to innovate. So I think that's going to be a big thing that's going forward, is that Silicon Valley is not going to be the center of AI and a lot of this innovation. And then secondly, I think there's going to be like two big types of players going forward. There's going to be continuing to see these research forward organizations such as, you know, London-based DeepMind and OpenAI, and a lot of the research groups inside the large companies such as Google Brain and Facebook AI, and they'll continue to lead advancements there, and also hopefully loop in academia and get them more integrated into the enterprise research world. And then there'll be the more commercial companies who manage to integrate AI more internally. There will be this group of companies that will be able to set themselves apart from the competition by their ability to successfully integrate AI into their daily operations. We're already seeing this kind of at places like Amazon and Microsoft and Uber and Netflix, a long range of companies. They don't necessarily publish their research in the same way as maybe some of the research organizations do, but they're really strong at using AI and machine learning in their applications and day-to-day business.
Where do you see AI progressing in the next 5 years?
I think we'll begin to see AI becoming more and more mainstream. I think it'll be much more embedded into companies of all sizes, and also just different places within the companies, not only in the deep tech areas. And I think as it becomes part of these internal operations, I think we'll quickly see large improvements. If there are implementations of deep learning internally, for example, in like ad optimization, and the results are then significant, I think we'll see it quickly spread throughout a company with everyone getting access to the new tech. I think these successful implementations can result in significant revenue growth, and that will be really hard to match with more traditional methods.
We heard you're looking for new opportunities. What's your ideal future job?
I hope really to get an opportunity to continue to work at the frontier of new and transformative technologies such as AI. I'm really fascinated by the VC world because that's where, you know, I get to see and work with a lot of the new startups of the future. I get to see what people think will happen in the next 5 or 10 years. But I'm also interested in the flip side of that, where being part of a company that is working on the cutting edge tech, and then be able to use some of my past experiences to help the company flourish.
And thanks again for joining us, Yina.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Great questions. It was my pleasure to join you.